Ibrahim Traoré was not expecting Egypt to come. But not after years of silence, not after decades of watching North Africa negotiate behind closed doors. While the Sahel burned, something shifted. On a quiet morning, a plane landed unmarked, discreet, but heavy with history. From its ramp descended not just a diplomat, but a signal. What happened next did not make headlines in Paris or Washington. But in Bamako, Niamey and Ouagadougou, it was thunder. Egypt with all its weight had chosen to stand with AES. And this was not charity. It was strategy, brotherhood, a reckoning. Because make no mistake, the Sahel no longer asks for protection. It builds its own shield. And now Egypt, the guardian of the Nile and the gate of the Arab world, was handing over tools, not commands. This story is not about a meeting. It's about the birth of a new African order. If you believe Africa deserves to protect itself on its own terms, like, comment, and subscribe. Because the world isn't ready for what's coming next. According to sources from Patriot to Hell, Egypt's support for AES is multidimensional. Militarily, it shares Sinai-hardened counterterrorism training, intelligence tools, and possible logistical equipment. Culturally, Al-Azhar trains African imams in moderate Islam to counter jihadist ideology. Economically, Egypt hosts forums with AES countries on mining, agriculture, and infrastructure. Diplomatically, Cairo respects AES sovereignty unlike ECOWAS or the EU. But behind this alliance lies a question: why now? What pushed Egypt to pivot from North African isolation to Sahelan partnership? Let us begin where others stop looking. Inside the strategy room of Cairo. In geopolitics, there are no favors, only transactions. For decades, Egypt saw itself as a bridge between worlds. The Arab League, the African Union, the Suez Canal. It was the cultural crossroad, the diplomatic heavyweight, the power in the north. But while Egypt played chess with Europe and the Gulf, something else was burning below the board. The Sahel, Mali was bleeding, Burkina Faso was under siege. Niger was shifting. And while France and the West scrambled to hold on to influence, the AES was born in fire, defiance, and absolute clarity. No foreign tutelage, no compromise, no more begging. This terrified many, but not Egypt. Because Cairo knows something others forget. When the fire is in your neighbor's house, you build a wall or you burn next. That is the real reason Egypt turned south. Not out of guilt, out of foresight. Let's be clear. Egypt did not just send weapons or prayers. It sent a message. We stand with those who choose sovereignty over sponsorship. Traoré's AES represents something Egypt once embodied. Self-made security. During the war in Sinai, Egypt fought not just men with guns, but ideologies wrapped in scripture. It built methods to detect, dismantle, and disarm extremism, not just on the battlefield, but in the minds of young men. That knowledge is now on loan to the AES. Training officers in demoning. Teaching urban combat tactics, sharing signals, intelligence. This is not symbolic. This is replication of Egypt's hard-earned doctrine against jihadism now written into the Sahel's veins. But war is not just fought with rifles. It is fought with words, with beliefs. That is why Al-Azhar, Cairo's intellectual crown, has begun training imams from Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. These aren't clerics for Cairo. They are shields against radicalization. Preachers who speak the language of peace in a land taught to worship fire. Imagine a village boy in Tai hearing Friday prayers not about martyrdom, but about community, about land, about staying alive, not dying for shadows. This is the unseen front in the war against terrorism. And yet Egypt's role is not just martial. It is infrastructural. While bombs fall in the east, Cairo builds in the west, proposals for roads connecting border posts, bridges for food convoys, airports to link security zones. Egypt isn't just training fighters. It's building arteries so the Sahel can breathe again. This matters because for too long development came with strings, European grants, IMF loans, aid with lectures. AES said no. And Egypt said we understand, but nothing in diplomacy is pure. Let's talk realpolitik. Egypt has its eyes on UNESCO. In 2025, its candidate Ka Elani runs for Director General. 3 AES states hold votes alone minor together critical. Cairo's charm offensive is not just brotherhood. It is calculation. Yet even in that there is respect. Because Cairo is not asking for submission. It is engaging with peers. It is for once treating Sahelian nations not as clients but as partners. And that is why the alliance matters. It sets a precedent for how Africa can do business with itself without French supervision, without American approval, just Africans with Africans. For Africans, that's not sentiment, that's a blueprint, and it is scaring the old architects in Washington. The Africa desk frowns in Brussels, eyebrows raise. Why is Egypt our ally talking to military jas? Why is Sisi shaking hands with Treya Goatani? Because Egypt sees what they refuse to. These are not rogue states. They are frontline states, and their success or failure will shape the continent. From Cairo's perspective, backing AES is not a gamble. It's an investment in African-made security architecture. The West offered drone strikes. AES asked for dignity. The West sent warnings. Egypt sent blueprints. The West froze talks. AES built roads. This is the new language of power in Africa. Action over applause. And now others are listening. Tunisia, Algeria, even Ethiopia. There is a quiet question forming across the continent. If Egypt can stand with AES, why can't we? This is not just about military exercises. It's about alignment, and Africa is aligning inward. Let that sink in. For the first time in post-colonial history, African states are forming security pacts without foreign commanders, planning economy without French francs, training imams without Gulf influence, and Egypt's role. It is the first northern anchor in the southern law order. The Nile has turned its gaze southward and the Sahel has opened its arms north. This is not normal diplomacy. This is tectonic shift. If you believe this alliance is more than headlines, if you see in it the promise of an Africa that governs, builds, and defends itself, then this is your moment. Some alliances are made in treaties. Others are forged in trenches. The Egypt-AES pact did not begin in a ballroom. It began in the realization that Africa's borders are illusions when terror moves like wind. It began when a Malian officer, barely 26, found a landmine near a school and disarmed it using techniques borrowed from Sinai. It began when a Kinabi imam stood up in a Friday sermon and told young men that the true jihad is rebuilding, not destroying. This is where diplomacy ends and doctrine begins. You see, Egypt did not come south with pity. It came with a plan, a strategic, multidimensional blueprint that doesn't just aim to support, but to synchronize. 3 pillars: military, ideological, infrastructural, each reinforcing the other. In military terms, Cairo isn't just offering training. It's redesigning theaters of operation. The Sahel, once a graveyard of failed interventions, is becoming a lab of resistant science. Through joint exercises, Egypt is mapping new doctrines for counterinsurgency adapted to Sovus, deserts, borderlands, tactics built for African realities, not imported manuals. Imagine Egyptian and Nigerian officers co-planning border outpost layouts with satellite support. Picture AES commanders using Egyptian doctrine to secure mining corridors, not just for profit, but for protection. This is military sovereignty taught by someone who's lived it. And yet, it's not just rifles that matter. In every war, there is a war of words. Al-Azhar's influence stretches deeper than foreign embassies dare to look. Its graduates are not just imams. They are ideological counterweights. They teach Islam as a force of civilization, not a tool of coercion. Why does this matter? Because across the Sahel, extremist networks don't just use weapons. They use scripture. They weaponize shame. They prey on poverty. And for too long, the counter-narrative came in Western-accented NGO brochures. Alien, distant, ineffective. Now the counter-narrative is homegrown. African-rooted in Cairo's thousand-year-old intellectual capital and more importantly spoken in Bombra Husi Fani. This is theological warfare, and AES just found its oldest ally. But no war, however sacred, is won without roads infrastructure. That is where Egypt makes its deepest bet. Let's talk numbers. 3 proposed regional airports, 9 joint infrastructure FFSTRUA projects for memorandums on agricultural logistics. These aren't announcements, they're blueprints in motion, and they aren't being built for show. They're being built for survival. Take the corridor from Naim to Gao. Previously, a lifeline for arms smugglers and jihadist cells. Now, with Egyptian engineering, it's becoming a surveillance route equipped with embedded drone hubs and rapid deployment outposts. Or the bridge in East Bikina, designed by Cairo's Corps of Engineers not just to carry vehicles but to resist sabotage, to reroute convoys when attacks occur. This isn't charity, it's strategic redundancy, and the West knows it. When French advisors left, they said chaos would fill the vacuum. Instead, engineers showed up. When US policymakers issued warnings, Cairo issued steel. This is the quiet revolution. No one headlines because the headline would read Africa is building without permission. But Cairo's motives are not entirely selfless. Egypt's Suez Corridor is a geopolitical jugular, and instability in the Sahel threatens to send shock waves into the Red Sea. The Horn of Africa, even up to the Levant. Cairo knows that a fragmented Sahel means a vulnerable Egypt. So, it invests not in firewalls, but in fireproofing. That's realpolitik. But it's also realism. And here's the twist no one expected. By standing with AES, Egypt has unlocked soft power that decades of pro-West diplomacy failed to yield. It is now seen across Francophone Africa not as a distant northern cousin, but as kin. In Naim, children draw pyramids next to AES flags. In Bamako, radio hosts refer to the Egyptian brothers from the desert. In Ouaga, local vendors sell handmade bracelets bearing the combined colors of the two alliances. This is not propaganda. This is presence. Presence that cannot be sanctioned. Influence that doesn't need a military base. It's the return of Pan-African gravity centers, not in Addis Ababa, not in New York, but in the space between the Nile and the Niger. But every alliance reaches a test. And Egypt knows the next battle won't be about territory, but about influence. Will its educational support outlast the money from the Gulf? Will its engineers outbuild the development banks? Will Cairo's respect for sovereignty hold if AES transitions to democratic civilian rule? Because let's be honest, Cairo is not a democracy. Its human rights record is far from clean. But in this moment where Western partners punish and isolate AES, Egypt chose engagement. That choice matters because in geopolitics engagement is everything. And so the question remains, is this the beginning of an African-led, African-built, African-defended century, or just another chapter in a continent's long seduction? What makes this different is not Egypt's strength, but AES's clarity. AES didn't wait for Europe. It didn't ask for legitimacy. It acted, and Egypt responded not with hesitation but with handshake. That handshake, captured in a dusty courtyard in Ouagadougou, may one day be studied like the Camp David Accords or Banding Conference. Not because of its glamour but because of what it defied. It defied the script. In that script, Africa is a client, a battlefield, a cause. But here in this chapter, Africa is a contractor, a builder, a partner, and Cairo, yes, Cairo, has joined the crew. Power in Africa is shifting not westward, not eastward, but inward. For years, Africa's security architecture was drawn by others. France built bases. The US dropped drones. China signed contracts. And Africa managed expectations. But something broke, not in silence, but an explosion. The withdrawal of Western forces from the Sahel left a vacuum. But the region did not collapse. It recalibrated. Mali said no. Burkina refused orders. Niger chose its own officers. And together, under the AES banner, they began doing what Africa was never supposed to do alone: defend itself. Then came Egypt. What followed was not a press conference, but a recalibration of gravity. For the first time, a North African heavyweight aligned itself not with Western coalitions, not with Arab spheres, but with the black heart of the continent. And suddenly, the world's compass spun. Because if Egypt, owner of one of Africa's most powerful armies, and the Suez gatekeeper, chooses to cooperate with AES, then everything changes. Borders become bridges, margins become front lines, and the myth of African dependence begins to unravel. This is not just about fighting terrorism. It's about rewriting protocols. Under Cairo's influence, AES commanders are now building regional doctrines, rules of engagement based on African law, African terrain, African norms. That may sound small, but it is seismic. Because for decades African armies were trained on foreign assumptions that villages are liabilities, that terrain is disposable, that logistics must rely on foreign airstrips. Now the AES Egypt coalition is rewriting that script. Villages are informants, not enemies. Terrain is sacred. Logistics are local. These are more than tactics. They are declarations. Declarations that African wars will no longer be outsourced or misunderstood, but power does not exist in silos. As military ties deepen, so does economic integration. In Bamako, Egyptian contractors are now bidding alongside Kinabi firms on solar irrigation.